The Wisconsin Badgers just filed a tampering lawsuit that will change college football forever. I've lost count of how many times I've seen a player enter the transfer portal with a do not contact tag, and almost immediately they've accepted an offer to play for a new school that everyone had them linked to for months. Then coaches want to act insulted when someone suggests tampering was involved. It's obvious what happened, and for the first time since NIL and the transfer portal were put into place, there may finally be consequences for it. And it's all because of a DB who only started one game last year. Welcome to the RFL show. I'm Emma Swart, and a couple weeks ago I stopped by the Badgers campus to pick up some new gear on my way to Illinois for the wedding for my co-host Brendan and his wife Brooke. It was a beautiful ceremony, and I'm truly grateful I got to be there for their special day. At the time though, I didn't realize I was passing through Madison just as history was unfolding. Florida native Xavier Lucas had a solid season last year in limited action for the Badgers, and on December 2nd signed a 2-year NIL deal directly with the University of Wisconsin to make him one of the highest paid players on the team. But on December 17th, a few hours after texting his coach what number he wanted to wear next year, Lucas asked to have his name put into the transfer portal, citing a serious life-threatening illness to his father. Wisconsin denied his request, referencing his new binding contract as the reason they weren't going to let him transfer. So, even though the portal was closed, Lucas withdrew from his classes in Madison and enrolled at Miami. But in an attempt to enforce the contract between the player and the school without making negative headlines for suing an athlete, Wisconsin filed a tampering lawsuit against Miami, claiming they had evidence that a Miami staff member and a well-known alumni met with Lucas despite knowing he had a contract with Wisconsin to compel him to break his deal. The lawsuit claims Miami's actions were intentional interference that was not justified or privileged and caused Lucas to breach his contract. In the lawsuit, Wisconsin lists student athlete A instead of directly naming Lucas to again make it seem like they're not suing the player. So what does all of this mean for college football? Well, in this video, I'm going to look at what could happen going forward if Wisconsin wins and how it could backfire immensely if they lose. For Wisconsin's sake, I hope they take this lawsuit more seriously than they do their Ohio State games. But before we get started, I want to get your opinion. College football clearly has a tampering problem, but I can't think of a simple way to fix the issue. There's an argument to be made that players should just honor their contract, but technically the players are just paid for their name, image, and likeness, and not to play for the school. It's been made a big deal on both sides that the athletes are not employees of the school and are not being paid to play. So let me know your ideas down in the comment section. I am genuinely curious to hear your thoughts on the solution to this problem. Let's start with what would happen if Wisconsin wins this lawsuit. First, I don't think the player will be made to re-enroll at Wisconsin. I think that would just make for a really unhealthy situation for all parties involved, and honestly, that ship seems like it sailed. Second, and more importantly, if the penalty is substantial, this would eliminate tampering in college football. The biggest reason every team seems to tamper is because currently, there's no consequences to doing it.
There's no rules! Let's just start back on. There's one rule!
NCAA does have rules against it, but it's almost impossible to prove anything, and even when there's an obvious case, the NCAA has done nothing to enforce this rule. But if there's finally a penalty for doing it, especially a substantial one, it should finally stop. And when I say substantial, I mean something like what the Dolphins had faced, which was a $1.5 million fine, a loss of a first-round pick, and the owner was suspended for a year. If the penalty isn't something that's up to that standard, then it just becomes an additional cost for poaching a great player from another roster, and colleges will continue to risk it. But if the penalty is something like a $1.5 million fine, the loss of scholarships or roster spots for a year, and the suspension of the head coach, that should be enough of a deterrent to stop the rampant tampering. Finally, it would also establish that the clause Big Ten schools put in their NIL contracts is enforceable and binding. The Big Ten has created a standard NIL contract template schools can use that states players agree they won't play for a different program during the duration of their contract. So far, no one's tried to enforce this portion of the contract. But now we're seeing the first legal challenge to this clause. Wisconsin is accusing Miami of compelling student athlete A to break this clause. If the judge rules in Wisconsin's favor that this clause is enforceable, that would be huge because it would actually mean that the contracts these players sign are binding and would prevent players from leaving for bigger deals. Both the penalizing of tampering and binding of players to contracts would lead to Wisconsin, and honestly every other program's, ultimate goal of creating some roster stability. There's less likely going to be high roster turnover if players don't have a guaranteed new spot before they enter the transfer portal, and if they're unable to break their contracts. This ruling would be a huge win for the universities and a major loss for players' rights. But that's only half the story. The real chaos starts if they lose. If Wisconsin loses, to put it mildly, all hell would break loose. If the Badgers have legitimate evidence of Miami tampering and the lawsuit still loses, It essentially establishes two things. One, that tampering is officially legal because there are no consequences for it. And two, that NIL contracts are worthless because they're unenforceable. With tampering, teams would also likely have to be less covert about their actions. A staff member wouldn't have to go through a player's personal trainer. They could just directly contact the player. If the NCAA isn't stopping it and the courts have determined it's legal, why even try to jump through the hoops to hide it anymore? Teams would have to consistently recruit their own players year-round or risk losing star players or chunks of their depth to other programs. Rosters would be constant revolving doors. Basically, it would just be never-ending free agency in college football. A badger's loss would also make the NIL contracts essentially worthless, because the ruling would establish that they are non-binding and teams have no way of enforcing the player to stay at the school that just bought his rights. The schools would be taking on an insane risk of signing a player to their program without any guarantee that the player will actually ever be in the program. This would make building out a roster impossible. You'd never know which of the guys who signed an NIL deal would be on the roster come fall camp until everyone reports. It's not hard to imagine a world where a team feels good about their quarterback room, so they divert recruiting efforts away from that position and focus on a different one, and come time for camp, you don't have enough arms because they signed elsewhere. This problem is only going to get worse with the $20 million cap coming July 1st and the limits being put on roster sizes. In this scenario, Wisconsin's lawsuit would massively backfire, creating more roster turnover than we've ever seen before and turn college football into anarchy. This would be a massive win for players' rights because they'd be free to constantly chase the largest deals they're being offered and strip all power away from universities. So no matter which way this lawsuit between Wisconsin and Miami falls, it'll have dramatic ramifications in college football for years to come. If Wisconsin wins, we could finally see real penalties for tampering, enforceable NIL contracts, and a more stable recruiting environment for coaches and programs. But it also means players will lose some of the leverage and freedom they've gained over the last few years. If Wisconsin loses, the opposite happens. Tampering essentially becomes legal. NIL contracts are meaningless, and roster chaos reaches a whole new level. Schools will be spending millions of dollars on players with zero guarantee that they'll actually suit up for them. If college football becomes a full-blown free agency, 365 days a year. Either way, this case is going to set a precedent that reshapes college football as we know it. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the biggest stories in football. If you want more content like this, I recommend this video right here, where we broke down the stakes of the Sunday ticket lawsuit that the NFL actually ended up losing. Thank you so much for watching the RFL show. I'm Emmett Swart, and we'll see you in the next video.